Thank you very much. I also waved my feet because Tom said everyone's going to buy my book. No jokes. Hope everybody is stimulated enough today and want to go buy mine. Well, any discussion about economics in my lifetime, no matter when it has been, has definitely had some negative tone, right? We've all kind of been living through negative, and we always want to look at the negatives, right? Because that's how we protect ourselves. So I'm going to ask everyone to do something physical, and I'll tell you why I'm doing it later. So everyone just kind of move their fingers. Move their fingers. Good. Now, I want you to ask yourselves, if they're your fingers, who are you? Well, you're not your fingers, right? So you might answer, well, my brain. My brain is determined to move fingers. But in reality, your brain is taking direction. Your brain is just a messaging system, right? Using your nervous system to communicate a desire that's somewhere. So while I talk, if you get very, very bored, contemplate that one, okay? Like, who are you? Who am I? Because there's an I that's not physical. There's an I that's sending that message to your brain, and your brain is then communicating it through your body and your fingers. So just think of it. And the reason I like to think about those kinds of things is because, for me, I guess I've always had a philosophical orientation, and I brought that with me to my career. And I think that trying to understand the big questions opens our eyes to realities that maybe we wouldn't see if we didn't think that way. At least that's been the case for me. I guess I have to say that, start with congratulating everyone in this room. And the reason I'm congratulating everyone in this room is because you got it right. Right? There are very few sectors in real estate that you can say that about today. I mean, someone here asked the question about malls and office buildings. There's just a lot of waste in the real estate industry today. A lot of uncertainty and a feeling of doom and gloom. The good news is that you guys in this industry, there's some combination, I'm sure, for each of you, of smart thinking and good fortune and being in the right place at the right time, which is always the way success. You got it right. And so you're in a good spot. You're on a relative basis. So you've been in a good spot. When I think about, I come from, so you know a bit about my background, Tom covered it, but for context, I think it's important to say that I started off in the banking industry, working and lending at savings, a couple of savings and loans. And I started my career at the very, very beginning of the secondary mortgage. So before really mortgages were traded. And my career began at the very beginning of when the concept of a lender selling mortgages to another investor began. That's what we now know as the mortgage-backed security market or commercial mortgage-backed securities market. And I found my way to Wall Street in the mid-1980s, and I found my way to a trading floor where my job was to make markets in mortgage products. Again, this is the very beginning of Wall Street's participation in buying and selling, packaging, securitizing mortgages. And I think that experience that I had starting off on the trading floor and really being on the trading floor for much of my career has been an extremely valuable differentiator for me because I focus very, very heavily on the flows of capital. And if you ask me kind of like what's the most important thing in understanding where the world's going, which is kind of what we all want to know, especially asset pricing or interest rates, which is what you're here to kind of think about, I would tell you that the most important thing is not expectations of future productivity. Absolutely not. It's capital flows. Capital flows determine interest rates. So if there's more sellers than buyers, as they say on Wall Street, interest rates are going up and prices are going down. If there's more buyers than sellers, So the way around. It's fairly simple stuff. But figuring out what motivates that is the key thing. So, I came, as Tom said, I created the CMBS business, and I created it really because I came from that securitization of the home mortgage business and ran that business at Morgan Stanley, built it and ran it, and saw that the commercial real estate market in the early 90s was in complete shambles. It was in shambles for some of the reasons that previous speakers spoke about, which was banks' inability or reluctance or regulatory pressures on banks, insurance companies, and other lenders, foreign lenders, and insurance to just exit the market at the same time. Well, think about that, exit the market at the same time. Just remember that. Remember that phrase, exit the market at the same time. Because that is an important part of understanding how financial markets work, because there's a herd orientation. And, we are all humans, and we share in common kind of an innate inclination to be inside of the herd. And it's something to, when you study human behavior and understand behavior, is something to really grasp and take into account. For me, I was able to create the commercial mortgage-backed securities market, and I kind of created it by living at the intersection of two businesses, financial markets and real estate. And really, that intersection that I kind of lived at is where you're all living too. Because you could be a fantastic operator, builder of your property. But if you don't understand financial markets, it doesn't matter. There are tsunamis that the financial markets will bring as they have cycle after cycle that can render all your hard work and all your good real estate thinking to waste if you don't capture that right. So we're all in that intersection, and I think acknowledging that is really important. So with that in mind, I'm just going to reflect back to 2008. I think that, first of all, the first big shift in the world, in America, started in the late 1990s. But in 2008 was a very important moment in the financial markets. And I'm going to tell a joke that was very common on Wall Street. It was common on the bond trading floors where I grew up. And it went like this. Albert Einstein dies, and he goes to heaven. And first person he meets after a little bit of banter, he asks the guy, "What's your IQ?" And the guy says, "My IQ is 155. And, Einstein's very happy. 135 is a very solid IQ. We're going to be very good friends. We're going to play chess together. Well, the next guy he meets, he asks the same question. "Well, what's your IQ?" And he goes, "My IQ is 175. I'm like, God, this is really heaven. 175. I have a lot of friends here. To be able to talk physics and all kinds of incredible things." Well, the third person he meets answers the IQ question and says, "My IQ is 90. And Einstein's puzzled. He doesn't really know what to say to the guy. And he starts to question whether he's in the right place or whether this guy's in the right place. And he thinks for a minute, because he wants to say something. And he says, "Where do you think interest rates are headed?" Now, the reason that joke was so popular in my time on trading desk, and it's very funny, is because only an idiot would answer that question. Where do you think interest rates are going? And the reason it would take an idiot to answer that question is because the idiot would not understand that at any given point in time, there are tens, hundreds of countervailing forces at work. And some push for rates being higher, some push for rates being lower. The prior speaker spoke about globalization and the kind of pushing rates lower, right? And there are other forces at work that kind of maybe push rates higher. The fact that we're running deficits and have debts to refinance that are massive with no buyers in sight. So there's push and pull of different forces. And only an idiot would kind of pick which force is going to prevail in that moment. Nobody would know. But in 2008, everything changed. In 2008, that joke didn't make any sense anymore. And it hasn't made sense since, and I would argue it won't make sense for quite a while. And the reason is, because to answer that question, you only have to answer one question. What does the Fed want interest rates to do? Okay? That changed, and that's a huge, huge shift. It went from, in my career, a market-driven interest rate environment to a Fed-determined interest rate environment. Now, if you had asked me 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, is there a chance we would see rates as high as they are today? And by the way, the idea that they're not that high by historical standards means everyone here knows this, makes 0 sense. It doesn't matter. Like where rates were in 1982, and by the way, the 10-year treasury was nearly 16%. I know because it's when I started my career. It doesn't matter. Like the fact that the 10-year treasury's averaged about 7% since I started my career doesn't really matter. And the reason it doesn't matter, which everyone here knows, is because every single asset was repriced at 1.5% interest rates. Meaning everyone borrowed at 1.5%, or everyone sold to someone who borrowed at 1.5%. And they paid a price commensurate with a 1.5% rate. So the whole world repriced at 1.5%. Now rates are 7%. It's a freaking disaster. Okay, it's unsustainable. And so it gets me to chess. Well, how do I get to chess? Anyone here play chess? So anyone here who plays chess would know that if you play against, let's say, my 12-year-old son, who's a beginner, and I do play with him sometimes, if I make a move, he's thinking about one move at a time. Well, I'm going to respond to my dad's move with this move. The better you get at chess, you're starting to anticipate, well, if he moves there and I move here, he'll move that, and then I'll need to move that. 2 moves ahead. Obviously, the masters of chess can think about the whole game from the first move, pretty much. We have, forget about today, go back 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we had a massive government debt. Massive. 2 years ago, we were running massive deficits, which meant that that debt would go up and up and up. Rates were low. Rates were 1.5%. And so it didn't feel that bad, right? And at 1%, you could run a pretty high debt. And if you're servicing at 1%, it doesn't feel that bad. But if you have to service that debt at 3% or 5%, and it's growing by a historically large amount because of historically large annual deficits, it didn't take a chess expert to imagine that high rates are going to kill us, okay? Just by looking at that. Maybe we don't have a lot of chess experts in Washington. I don't know, okay? We try to stay away from Washington. I would say this. I would say that to say that interest rates 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago were not manipulated, I would ask whoever believes that to explain how Italy is borrowing at under 1%, or Greece, or even America. Who here would buy U.S. government bonds? Forget about Italian government bonds. Who here would buy U.S. government bonds with their own money at 1%? Okay, so there are no morons here, obviously. Who would buy it at 2%? No. 3%? Nobody. Nobody. Okay. So who was buying it? And why were they buying it? So you have to ask yourself the question. When I look at kind of thinking about where the world's going, as the prior speaker said, there's a ton of noise. By the way, I don't watch TV, except for binge watching crime shows, or sports. It's the only thing I'll ever turn to. I don't think there's any information to be gleaned from TV. And I even think Wall Street Journal is, it's okay. I agree with reading it very kind of superficial. I like the phosphor puzzle. But when I look at it, I say, what is the governing thing? Well, how can I figure out where the world's going with all of this noise? Well, at first I start by looking backwards. So I said I started my career in 1982 when the 10-year Treasury was nearly 16%. And until very recently, the 10-year Treasury had gone down to about 1.5%. So for about 40 years, the 10-year Treasury, with some bumps, it looked like this. That was the story of that 40-year cycle. You didn't need to know. Like, a lot of other things happened during that 40-year cycle, and the news reported it as though it was important, but it wasn't important. The only thing that was important was that rates went down by historical amount, by about 1,400 basis points. And if you knew 40 years ago that was going to happen, all you need to do was get long financial assets, including real estate, and have staying power to ride out the bumps of the road, and you become fantastically wealthy. Fantastically wealthy. You didn't need to be a genius. You just needed to do that. You need to get the one overarching thing right. So I asked myself, what is the overarching thing for the next 30 or 40 years that I got to get right? And it's the one that's the biggest thing. So to me, it's our debt. It's not going to go away. I mean, we have $33 trillion of government debt. And by the way, when we hear it's $26 trillion of public owned, it's as though what's owned by the Social Security system isn't going to get repaid. Well, that's kind of a little tricky and misleading. It's got to get repaid. That's where the money's coming from Social Security. So there's $33 trillion of debt. It's growing by a historical amount. Now, if you look back at our debt around 2001, it was under 10 trillion. It's been like this over the last 20 years. It's interesting to know why. Like, is it Obama's fault? Is it Bush's fault? We like to blame people, which is actually laughable, okay? Because to a very large extent, people are just the victims of circumstance. In my humble opinion, another very big story, which I think explains that kind of surge in deficits and debt over the last 20 years, is the impact of technology. So the combination of people not having an education, as was spoken about, and needing to be wards of the state. So the social safety net has to grow because we're not going to allow plenty of people to live homeless in this country, but at some point, everyone can't be homeless, okay? So our social safety net is trying to catch more people before they become homeless. Technology is designed to destroy jobs, for the simple that there's another word, which is increased efficiency, but the increased efficiency comes from destroying jobs or reducing jobs. So here we have a historically high population. Technology is working very hard to reduce jobs. That means higher social safety until populations adjust, until the economies adjust. And that explains to me why we have the deficits we have, why we have the debt we have. It's not a pretty thing. So now let's go back to the finger wiggling, because we're at a good low point in this where everyone's appropriately depressed. And so for me, what keeps me cheery, well, first of all, I understand that it's normal for every human being. It's naive to not kind of notice this. We all know we're going to die. And somehow, somewhere, particularly as we get older, that mortality, it has an insidious effect on everything we do, every choice we make. It's just there. Kind of, somewhere subconsciously it's there. But if the reality is, I'm not my finger, and I'm not even my brain, and I'm not even something physical, well, my brain's going to die, my fingers are going to die. I actually don't think I'm going to die. I'm going to go somewhere, who the hell knows where, but hopefully not hell. But that kind of, you might call it religious or spiritual component of life, I think allows us to overcome that fear. I don't know of another way to overcome that. And I think if we can really grasp that, we can bring our better selves to everything we do. We can make better decisions. We can be better partners. We can just live better lives. My book, Greatness is a Choice, is all about making the choice every day to bring our best. So there are people who use the word greatness in a funny way, and they think, like, if you look at my book, Dr. J, a basketball player, wrote the foreword. He happens to be one of my best friends. I won't tell you the story of how that happened. We did play a basketball game. We didn't become friends because of that, okay? It wasn't much of a game. But when we think of people like Dr. J and Michael Jordan and other incredible, obvious kind of like, wow, they've achieved high level of achievement, that's great. But the reality is that greatness is a choice that we can make in every minute of every day. How we show up, right? How do we show up at the breakfast table when we see our family? How do we show up when we negotiate a deal with somebody? Are we bringing our best self? How do we show up even in a moment like this? Am I bringing my best self to you, or am I just mailing it in? Are you bringing your best self here and listening to me in an engaged way? Our lives are all elevated when we encounter people who choose to be great. When we eat a meal, it doesn't have to be a fancy meal. It could be a hamburger. And the hamburger's brought to us, and it's just great. And we know it's great. And we know that whoever prepared that hamburger brought it hard for us, and it elevates us in that minute. Well, we all have the power to choose to be great. We can all elevate each other. To me, that's a great moment. And it's something worth paying for. And it's really what my book's all about. I'm going to end my comments with a reflection on 2008, because I think it's worth reflecting on. It was such a big moment. I remember sitting in a fancy restaurant, having lunch on a wintry day in 2008 in New York. And I was looking by, and it was flurries, freezing. I felt so privileged that I wasn't having freezing cold. And I was in this wonderful, beautiful, fancy restaurant. And I thought to myself, the world may end. You know, if things are that bad, the world may end. And I started to think to myself, the Fed is printing money, right? And it's very, very publicly printing money. And what happens if the average worker, when he's given his paycheck, says, no, you know, I don't want those dollars anymore. Like, what are they really worth if they're printing them? Maybe you just give me a basket of food, right? Or pay my rent. I don't want those dollars, right? And by the way, we laugh about that, but, you know, countries like Venezuela, where my wife's from, inflation, which is the debasement of the value of currency, has been severe. And there are many, many stories of that, right? I think it's realistic to think that we're here with a debt deficit we're running here, that we're facing that. So I started to think very, very scary thoughts. I started to reflect upon a statistic I read that every society is only 5 missed meals away from anarchy. Anarchy is not something any of us want to go through, I'm sure. And I started thinking, man, scary times we're in. And then I had this epiphany in that moment of darkness. I realized that nobody wants the world to end. Not the richest person who's having too much damn fun. Not the most corrupt politician who's having too much damn fun. And not the poorest person who just wants to feed his family and make it to another day. Nobody wants anarchy. And then I realized it's an inadvertent conspiracy to prolong the world. Everyone's going to suck it up, and everyone's going to do whatever they have to do to perpetuate the world. So therein lies one of my great theories. The world will never end. Now, there's going to be moments like 2008 where it's going to feel like it's ending. Those are very interesting moments because in reflection, obviously that created tremendous opportunity to make a lot of money if you acted a certain way, and to lose a lot of money if you didn't act a certain way. So what is that certain way? And it goes back to this word orientation. Well, in 2008, when the world seemed like it was falling apart, everyone did the same thing. Everyone tried to get liquidity. Everyone tried to get cash. Cash. Why? Because they were solving for the same problem, which is the wrong problem. They were saying, this is a tsunami coming, and all I want to do is make sure that I have the same amount of cash once the tsunami passes as I have today. So if I have $1 million, when the tsunami passes, I want $1 million. So if that's the problem you're solving for, well, get liquid. And everyone did, right? Well, at that moment, the Dow was trading about 6,600. It's now roughly 5 times that. Do you think the companies in the Dow got 5 times better? Or 5 times more valuable? No, they didn't. It's just that the dollar in your pocket got 80% less valuable. The dollar in your pocket buys 20% of the Dow you could buy at that time. So the zeal to kind of solve for the problem that everyone should be solving for, always solving for, is how do I preserve purchasing power, not how do I preserve nominal currency in my bank. And if purchasing power was the answer, was the question that we were trying to solve for, well, we might have thought, okay, go back to my world will not end. Well, the world can't end because Ethan said it. So how can the world not end? Because it looks pretty scary at this point in time. And the answer is what the answer always will be. And it will be from now on because 2008 changed this. The Fed will print money. Okay? We're through the looking glass. It can't go back. And so printing money is the only way to avoid anarchy. And I don't like it. Actually, I'm a very free market oriented person. I've always leaned libertarian. But, reality is, if anarchy is in play, it's time to do anything to avoid that. And so, printing money, fine. But if you know that's coming in a 2008 scenario, what's the worst possible move you can make? Cash. Because cash is being debased. So, in the moment where you feel like, and the herd is always running out of that fear, cash is the worst investment in the history of the world. Not only in 2008, but ever. And the reason is because inflation's always there. There are times that inflation's higher, but inflation's permanent. And inflation, remember, means the debasement of the value of currency. So if you're in currency, you're losing purchasing power every year. The question is how much. It's a guaranteed loser. What other investment can you make that's a guaranteed loser except cash? It's the only one. So that's why I say it's the worst investment you could possibly make. Well, I'm going to stop there because we'll lose some time for Q&A as promised, but thank you for your attention. Y'all brought it great today.
I can sit up there and probably ask you about an hour and a half worth of questions. But I don't want to do that. If you don't mind staying at the podium and we're in openness to Q&A from the audience, I have a whole bunch of questions, and I'd love to kick it off if you don't mind.
You're paying the bills. No, they are paying the bills.
I heard an interview that you did, I think it was earlier this year. I was listening to a podcast, and you referred to a head in the sand mentality that the real estate industry tends to demonstrate when market conditions change radically. I think there's some semblance of that as a reality recently, maybe today. Can you help us understand a little bit what you meant by that and practically speaking what it means for us?
Okay. My book covers a lot of things, including this, perhaps not even directly, but basically, dishonesty is theft. Okay, think about that. Dishonesty is theft. Dishonesty is never a good choice. Not even when you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, you're giving them wrong information. And wrong information will lead to the wrong choices, the wrong action steps. So everybody here, you don't want to hear the truth, close your ears, but every single one of your assets is worth a lot less than it was a year and a half ago. Okay? That's the truth. Now, we live in an industry where we want to mask that. I think one of the interesting contributions that I made really inadvertently by creating CMBS was I created a connection for the first time ever between real estate and the capital markets. Right? That was the bridge to the capital markets. And all of a sudden, before me, before CMBS, you had lenders basically making loans and holding them, and then you had borrowers borrowing. And if values went down, you just call your friend at Aetna or Cigna or wherever, and they didn't want to foreclose, they didn't want to have a problem, so whatever, let's make it a combination. And pretend the building's worth what it was worth. Well, you can't do that when there's a CMBS in the REIT industry and there's compromise. You can't do it. It just doesn't work. Somehow still, because a big part of this industry is financed, not through CMBS, but through non-CMBS portfolio lenders, there is still the kind of, what we all know is the extended and pretend game, right? But the extended pretend game doesn't really serve anybody's interest. It's about concealing the truth and preventing action from, from being taken. So I think that the industry is filled with assets that are worth less than they were. Considering that came in, also everybody took advantage of historically low borrowing costs. So not only are the price points at which people got in the last cycle historically high, but the leverage level is also historically high. That combination is not going to work very well going into this today. I remember the last few percent I got, this is not a good time to say, employ high leverage. I was thinking, well, it's too late. That ship sailed.
So sort of connected to that, especially in the storage industry, we hear a lot about institutional capital wanting to come into this. I mean, a lot of it has come into the space. How much more institutional capital is working out there and wants to get active in the space?
Well, I think the space is what, like I said at the very beginning, when I congratulated you all for being in one of the very few good places in this industry. I think you're in a good spot still. I think that for many reasons. Now, notwithstanding the question before about rates being high, which is suppressing movements. The movement's a big part of what you guys can make money on. I think that's true. And I think movement will be less. It's been less, and it will continue to be less for some time. But I also think, if you see the world the way I see it, and you see the Fed and all central banks as manipulative bodies that have to act in order to avoid anarchy, first and foremost, that manipulating interest rates lower, it'll dawn on them shortly that they have to do that. It's shocking that it's taken this long, but again, we don't have really chess players there apparently. But it will dawn on them very soon that they're going to have to do that. So I think that staying power, if you're in positions today, just staying power. Negotiate staying power at all costs. Rates will plummet. Because remember, for this economy to appear healthy, rates have to be in the ones, on the 10. Forget about it.
So if anybody else has questions, please raise your hand because there are microphones here. I do have another one though.
Or the room one.
Howard Marks, the chairman of Oaktree, writes his memos. I enjoy reading them. He wrote one entitled Sea Change about a year ago, and where he positioned kind of what he referenced the greater cycle, the 40-year cycle, is changed. And the 0 to 2% base interest rates are now 200 basis points or higher going forward. And what used to be an absence of a fear of loss, and what used to be a willingness and an eagerness to make really risky investments, so what you're talking about, you just had to invest and have staying power, and you would win. Mark's commented for the third time in his career, he's seen an absolute fundamental shift. And the game is different now. And interest rates are going to continue to stay higher, or not necessarily get higher than where they are today, but the base rate has changed. The attitudes and goals have to change as a byproduct of that. And the sea change is real. What are your thoughts about that?
So I think that, I hate to disagree with someone as famously smart as Howard, but I think that it's very healthy. Doesn't feel healthy. Medicine never does. But it's very healthy that rates came up the way they did, because it did introduce a sense of, things bad can happen, right? So for so long we were in this kind of fantasy environment, and entire generations had never experienced a bad day. Real estate, trading desks, stock markets. So I think it's good. We're all smarter, we're all a little more cautious, and we're all going to come out of it better. So I think in that sense I agree with him. But for the reasons I mentioned before, I honestly can't see rates not plummeting. It wouldn't make any sense. I don't see how we survive 4 to 5%, or even 3.5 to 5% rate.
So just sort of the natural, Neil, we'll get to you. I just want to ask a follow-up to that question.
Especially, by the way, everybody knows is there's no pricing power on rates in anything, even in your stuff, because people are kind of finished. You can't get them to pay more. There's nowhere to go on rental increases. So without rental increases, rates between 3.5% and 5% don't make sense.
So the follow-up question, sort of the conundrum, if you will, for borrowers in the audience today. We see it inside Talent Invest frequently. Somebody calling a maturing construction loan but not ready for permanent financing, bridge loan, covenants may not be met. So we're looking at refinancing into new bridge loans, variable rate financing that's coming due or maybe maturing in 12 to 18 months. For the 12 to 18 months out, folks, barring, hey, I have a covenant default coming. If you were that owner with that floating rate loan maturing 18 months from now, what would you do?
Well, the very good news is that you all are in a good asset class. You're not in office building. So if you're in office building for that question, you go to Hawaii and you send the keys back to the bank. They'll receive more time. But in your situation, you take advantage of the fact that there is organized capital that needs to charge. It needs fees to be charged on it, which means it needs to be invested. Okay? And so there's a lot of money that has been raised in funds that have been sitting uninvested. And I can promise you, again, understanding your behavior, the managers of those funds will not give the money back and say, gee, couldn't find anything good to do with it. Okay? That'll never happen. So they're going to find the prettiest of the ugly. And they're going to go, this looks good. You guys are the prettiest of the ugly. But I would rush to take that money, because that money is not going to be there for very long, and it does need to get expressed. So the sooner you kind of cut your deal, the deal's not going to get better with time, it's going to get worse with time. With the caveat that the less rates go down precipitously, then everything gets better.
Yes, some questions, Ross.
How do you think? It's a pleasure listening to you. So you created the CMBS world in the late 90s.
Early
90s, sorry. And then 2008 as...
I don't know that.
2008, the world changed, right? and we hear of CMBS 1.0 and 2.0, and 2.0 put a lot more bootstraps and powers for the special servicers, gave the introduction to cash management and sweeps and things like that to give more power to the special servicers once cash flow disappeared, if you will. So here we are today. Obviously, a good portion of the CMBS is office. How do you envision CMBS 3.0, 4.0?
When I created CMBS, it was to solve for an existential problem. There was no money to refinance the loans at any LTV. So literally the whole industry was a desperate borrower. So if you think about it, CMBS was built to solve the problem of a desperate borrower. It never changed. Like, it always became the borrower who was not favored by traditional lenders would make their way to CMBS. Hotels, office buildings, B malls, C malls, all that stuff, right? CMBS was built by me and others on my team in haste to solve an existential problem. And there were fundamental problems with the construct of CMBS. I would have thought by now that the industry would have fixed those inherent kind of conflict problems between the senior bondholders and the special servicer and the borrower, and figured out a smarter way, but no, it has not happened yet. I suspect it will at some point. I think, in fact, that probably the only interesting thing for me as an investor today is CMBS deals, because I think that's where price clearing might occur, whereas I think in the private markets it will be a little opposite. But if you have everyone here, from the guy who created CMBS, don't borrow from CMBS lender unless you have to.
You have another question on the board?
Yeah, that kind of took my last question. Not the one you said, but I was thinking more of the future of the CMBS market. To the extent we are borrowers in that, I mean, you said tongue in cheek to not do that. Maybe it wasn't tongue in cheek.
No, it wasn't tongue in cheek.
What do you see happening in the industry over the next few years? The last gentleman talked about.
If we have this kind of like washing out and a lot of bad debt issues, there'll be lawsuits, and lawsuits will cause change. So I think that's what we're looking for, which would be okay, it'd be helpful. Yes.
Last question. It's going to make more of a comment. So, Town Dust did 2 refis for us on 2 of our assets into CMBS. And so, thank you, because they were 10-year IO.
That's fine.
3.08. But they were the right asset class. We had a shopping center at CMBS, and we swore we'd never do another CMBS ever. And they talked us into those 2. But they've been great. So it really depends on.
And Robbie makes that point. I say, I did say somewhat true and somewhat tongue in cheek. It's situational, right? I mean, in your situation, it was the smartest thing you could have done. A lot of people find themselves in having to make that choice, and they're in a compromised spot, and it's for reasons that are structural. All right, thank you very much.